For Politics PA and Broad and Liberty, my name is Steve Ulrich. Welcome to another in our series on the Keystone Candidate Forum. Today, we're pleased to be joined by one of the candidates for Attorney General for the Commonwealth of Pennsylvania, Eric Settle. Eric, a former Deputy General Counsel to Governor Tom Ridge, is running under the banner of the Forward Party. Mr. Settle, thank you for joining us today.
Steve, thanks for having me, and please call me Eric. As my dad used to say, his father was Mr. Settle.
I think I've done the same thing to people as well. Eric, talk to me a little bit about the Forward Party and why you are running under the banner of the Forward Party.
Sure, Stephen, thank you. By the way, thanks so much for having me here today. You know, one of the challenges when you're running on a third party is we're not getting the same amount of attention as the two major candidates are. So I really appreciate you making this opportunity for me to come. So the Forward Party, as some people may know, was started by Andrew Yang and Christy Whitman about 2 years ago with the idea to try to create a centrist party to try to solve problems from the middle. And so what happened when they began that party, they are now beginning to try to get ballot access throughout the United States. And each state is different. So in some states, it's a petition, like Utah or Colorado. But in the Commonwealth, it requires someone to run statewide and get 2% of the vote in 10 counties. And so that's the challenge that the Forward Party has, to have permanent minority party status as their step on their way to try to be a national party and ultimately a national majority party around the country. But first, they're starting in the grassroots. And so I was approached about a year ago by some people from the Forward Party that said, would you be willing to do this? And as someone who has been in and out of government, as you mentioned, I had the privilege of working for Tom Ridge as governor. I had a chance to be the lead lobbyist for Autism Speaks and was able to help a major piece of legislation get done for kids with autism. I've been in and around Harrisburg my whole career, and I've always wanted the opportunity. In fact, I tell the story that when I came out of the governor's office, I was going to run for Congress in what was then the 13th congressional district outside of Philadelphia. And I was, mid-30s, young Republican, and had started talking to some officials about maybe running in that seat that was Marjorie Margolis-Vincey's seat. It was a very tight seat. If you remember, Steve, she had voted for the Clinton budget, even though she said she wouldn't. And so there was a lot of pressure to say some good people have to run against her in the next election. So I began the process of talking to folks around, local political leaders, and they were interested. I was this moderate Republican, a good profile for a candidate, young family. And then one day I was at my then 7-year-old son's soccer game. And I said, if I'm running for Congress, I will be at everybody else's kids' soccer game but my own. And I thought, you know what? For the next 20 years, I made a pledge to myself. I was going to focus on my career, pay for college, save for my retirement. And if the opportunity came when I was older, I would then try to seek to go back into public service. Right. And when that moment came, the Republican Party that had been part of my life the whole time had morphed into the party of Trump that made me both uncomfortable and frankly unelectable. And so I thought, all right, well, this is not going to happen for me. Right. And, but sometimes America is a land of second chances. And when the Forward Party approached me a year ago, I said, you know what? This is that opportunity. My kids are now grown. One is a young lawyer outside of Philadelphia. The other just finished his PhD in cancer biology and is working in New York. So I thought, you know what? This is my opportunity. And so that's kind of how I came to this moment.
Before we get into some of the positions that you're taking for the position, you mentioned 10 counties to get 2% out of 67.
Yes.
Do you target let's say maybe a college region, like maybe Lehigh County? Do you target Center County? Where are you focusing your energies?
Right. Well, so we have, obviously, there's a natural constituency for me in the Southeast, because that's where I've been, most of my life. And we have a lot of volunteers in some places out in the Southwest, out in the Pittsburgh area. So we've been focusing a little bit on college towns, but also in some of the smaller counties, some of the smaller counties in the Northeast. It's interesting, we have a group of very dedicated volunteers, and so we're kind of focusing on where they are. Sure. And it was an interesting story that just told yesterday. We have this one volunteer up in the Northeast. He was literally walking door to door in Sullivan County, very rural county, and he had already started having conversation with an older farmer there about me, and he said, I already voted, and I already voted for Eric. And I thought, that's pretty cool. So I've got at least one vote in Sullivan County.
Outstanding. One of the things we've heard from the Republican and the Democratic candidate is a discussion over whether the Attorney General for the Commonwealth of Pennsylvania needs to be a prosecutor.
Yeah, that's an interesting part. And I, from my perspective, although I had some criminal law experience as a young lawyer when I started my practice in Philadelphia, I don't think that job really is a job that necessarily has to be a prosecutor job. As we know, our current governor, Josh Shapiro, who I was privileged to serve on his transition team, was an excellent attorney general. And Josh had never, ever, frankly, prosecuted a case. Right. Josh, he was a great AG. So I think it's not really the most important part of that job. I mean, look, it's really important for Pennsylvanians to feel safe. And it's important for the attorney general to play a role in that. But as you know, the attorney general is not the lead law enforcement official. The state police is under the jurisdiction of the governor. The DAs of the 67 counties kind of primary criminal jurisdiction. So though there is a role for the criminal. There is a role in the criminal justice system for the attorney general, and I think if I were attorney general, that would be very important to me. I don't think it's primary. And one of the things I've said is, if I'm elected attorney general, my first act will be to appoint a first deputy who is an experienced criminal prosecutor, because I recognize that I have a series of skills, but being a prosecutor is not one of them. But I think having someone by my side would be the right thing to do.
One of the things that Governor Shapiro certainly touts is the fact that he went 43-0 against former President Donald Trump on the lawsuits surrounding the 2020 election. Which position do you take when it comes to election integrity in the state?
Well, look, it's interesting. One of the other things that's really important is protecting democracy. And that concept never really meant much to anybody until we got to January 6th, where we really had, for the first time in our country's history, a not peaceful transfer of power. Mm-hmm. And so I think that's an incredibly important part. And as an independent, and this is one of the things that has really resonated with voters around the Commonwealth, which is I am no longer an R. I'm not a D. I'm a forwardist. I am an independent. And so wouldn't it be better to have someone, for example, the Attorney General that gets sworn in on January 17th, right around the corner from here, will take office on January 17th. And this election may still be in doubt at that point. Right. I hope not. I hope there's a clear outcome and we move forward as a country. Mm-hmm. But it's very possible that the new Attorney General will have a role here, and I will work very hard to make sure that whatever the count is, that's the whole point, is to make sure it's a fair count and that we defend democracy appropriately, and that whatever the will of the people of the Commonwealth is should be honored, regardless of whether it's Donald Trump or Kamala Harris.
It seems as though one of the things I like about Pennsylvania is the decentralized election process. As you said, 67 counties. I'm a former election director myself. I know what it was like managing 159 precincts in just one county. Is that the best way to conduct elections, do you believe?
Look, Pennsylvania has a tradition of decentralized government. We have townships, we have counties, we have boroughs. I don't know. I haven't really thought about it. I too have been active in election. I was a committee person both in Philadelphia and in Montgomery County. So I've sort of been there in the trenches, mm-hmm. and it's a little crazy. But I also think that what makes election so special is that your community shows up. Yes. Twice a year. Most people show up once a year, but I was a super voter until I was excluded from the primary because I'm no longer a registered, I'm now a registered independent. I think, look, it creates issues, but I think that it's a way for the community to be involved in what is a very special moment, every year where people say, this is how I want to be governed.
Let's talk about the drug crisis in the Commonwealth. The flow of fentanyl obviously is a huge topic among the candidates for the position. What are your thoughts as to how we can stem the tide?
Yeah, look, we have to figure out a way to get that deadly drug off the streets. And this is one of those areas where I'm not as experienced, but I know that this is something that has to be a focus of the new Attorney General. I do think that we need to use the opioid settlement money effectively around the Commonwealth. I had experience. I was in the Ridge administration during the tobacco settlement time. So I've had a little bit of experience of what do we do with this huge pile of money? And it's really important that it gets out into the counties, into programs that will help people. Because look, at the end of the day, the fentanyl crisis is both a human crisis and also a criminal law crisis. And so we've got to look at it in both ways.
Let's talk about gun control.
Sure.
And the Second Amendment and your position when it comes to those issues.
Look, I'm very supportive of the Second Amendment. I believe that, the Supreme Court was clear. The Second Amendment means that people have a right to bear guns. And I accept that. I also accept that we have a gun problem in this Commonwealth. I think we have too many guns, and we certainly have too many weapons of war on the street. And so one of the things I have said publicly is we need to find a way to get assault weapons out of the Commonwealth. And one of the tangible things I would support as Attorney General, it's obviously the role of the legislature, but would be to ban the sale of new assault weapons. I think about the shooting in Georgia about a month ago, and I think about the 14-year-old that did that. And although red flag laws are important and background checks are important, the only thing that would stop a 14-year-old from doing that is that his father couldn't buy his son a gun for Christmas that year.
Right.
We've got to, we have this every time we have another one of these mass shootings. Inevitably, it's an assault weapon. It's an AR-style weapon. And every time we say we have thoughts and prayers and we do nothing. And so what I'm saying is let's do something. Let's just say, let us ban the sale of new assault weapons in Pennsylvania. It won't solve every problem, but it will be at least a tangible step forward. And if gun violence drops, then, as we did with the federal assault weapon ban, it was on for 10 years. It went away. We have to reconsider it. But look, I'm very respectful of people. I'm not asking for people to turn in their guns. None of that. I'm just saying is let's take one tangible step forward.
Will that be the solution for those who don't want to see more school resource officers placed in our schools around the state?
Well, it's not. Look, I think it's a combination. Look, making schools safer is important. I'll tell you a story. I was the former president of Mainline Reformed Temple, a synagogue outside of the Philadelphia area. And I was president about 10 years ago, and we have hardened our target over the last 10 years. And there's a part of me that when I was president, I felt that if you let the bad guys win, if you do that, you let the bad guys win. And I don't want to let the bad guys win. It's kind of how I feel about, how much we changed our lives in the wake of 9/11. Sure. But I also recognize that people are afraid. And honestly, when I walk in, I was there, last week. It was the end of the high holy days. And we now have bulletproof doors. And we have 3 or 4, for special services, we have 3 or 4 Lower police officers are there. Otherwise, we have an armed guard there all the time. And it's a terrible thing. But the fact of the matter is that there is violence out there. And I do think having some trained people in the schools making sure the kids are safe is very important.
Let's turn subject to reproductive rights and the Pennsylvania laws regarding abortion.
Yes.
Your thoughts?
Look, I think the role of the Attorney General is to defend the laws of the Commonwealth, and as long as those laws are constitutional. And certainly the current Pennsylvania law is constitutional, and so I would support it as Attorney General. I am pro-choice. It's interesting. When I was in the governor's office, Governor Ridge was considered to be a VP nominee for Bob Dole. Right. Makes me feel old sometimes when I talk about that. I was young at the time, and it's interesting. We had a position which was that the Casey decision comes out of our Commonwealth was the right way to handle this, which is freedom of choice with some reasonable restrictions. And that was the governor's position. And we all felt comfortable about that. But that wasn't pro-life enough for even then, the Republican Party of 1996. And, with the Dobbs case being removed, it just seems like we've lost an ability to have some fundamental right covered nationally. I mean, the fact of the matter is that obviously states have the, may have the rights to do what they want to do, but people don't have the ability to necessarily move.
Right.
So I feel like going back to kind of Casey, where you have, again, the right to choose, but with some reasonable restrictions is a reasonable way to go. And I think it covers the vast majority of Pennsylvanians. I mean, look, I respect the fact there are people on one side that see abortion as murder, and I see people on the other side who say it's my body, my choice. And I respect those positions, but I think we have to find a way in the middle. And that's a little bit of what the Forward Party's about, which is let's find a solution that the most people can live with.
So is the party's solution somewhere in the middle of codify Roe v. Wade and Donald Trump saying throw it back to the states?
Well, it's interesting. The most interesting part about the Forward Party is we don't actually have any particular positions as a party. Okay. What they've decided is that they're going to let candidates make up their own minds for what is center in the middle in their state. So in the Commonwealth, I think where I'm going is a place we were for many, many years, and I think we can live with that. And I think what we have on the books now sort of works. In other states, it's different. And so the only thing, it's interesting, the only positions that the Forward Party as a group takes is we believe in open primaries, we believe in independent redistricting, and we are supportive of ranked choice voting. Those are the three things. And the fourth thing is we believe in civil campaigns.
It's interesting to hear you talk about the positions in that respect, because I think a lot of people are looking for a center position in that respect. And did you get the sense that when it comes to whether it's reproductive rights, gun control, did you get any inkling at all from whether it was Andrew Yang, Chris Child Whitman about where you should be headed, or is it really just left in your lap? Eric, what do you think is best for the state?
They really do. They really do leave it. And I've spent time with both of those folks, and they're great. They're great Americans. They've been fun to hang out with. The governor, I tell a story. Governor Whitman came out during the petition drive. She came out to do petitions with me in Philadelphia, and we're standing there. There's a moment when you kind of go out to canvass when you're just a normal citizen until you say, "Okay, I am now Eric Settle. I'm running for Attorney General. Nice to meet you." You kind of shift into campaign mode.
Right.
And as the governor and I are standing there, and I turned to her, I said, "How long has it been since you've done this?" And she turned to me, she says, "It's been a while." I said, "I appreciate that. I'm glad you're here." And with that, we were like, "Okay, ready?" And we're in. Hello. And it turns out that she loves dogs. So she's actually coming back. If you're going to be in Philadelphia, she's coming back on October 26th to campaign again, and we're going to be out there talking to voters. But no, they've been great people. So no, they have basically said, you feel how you feel, you advocate your own positions. And for me as a candidate, it makes me feel very comfortable because I've been able to articulate how I feel about a number of issues, and having worked for a Republican governor, having helped a Democratic governor, having helped Democratic candidates, I really do try to see it from the middle. I mean, I've historically been sort of socially liberal and fiscally conservative. And so this is a very comfortable place for me to be. And on some of these issues, particularly the issue, the gun control issue, I really feel like if we're not going to do something, we should just stop talking about it, because it's just too painful to go through this literally week after week after week without at least trying to do something to make the situation better.
As a possible Attorney General of the Commonwealth, I'm assuming you work with the county DAs. When you look at Larry Krasner in Philadelphia County and all the concerns that have been raised about his progressive ideas, how does the state's Attorney General factor into what's going on with Krasner and everything that? Yeah,
a couple thoughts. First of all, I think the idea of a progressive prosecutor was an interesting idea. I mean, look, you try in American politics, you try different things. And I respect the fact that people thought that might be a good idea. And I do recognize that there are, historic injustices in the criminal justice system that need to be fixed. Okay. But at the end of the day, my view is the job of a prosecutor is to prosecute crimes. And Mr. Krasner has really not done a very good job. The people of Philadelphia, and I live just outside of Philadelphia, do not feel as safe as they used to feel. And one of the interesting issues about that was the Act 40, the law that the legislature passed, allowing the Attorney General to appoint a special prosecutor to prosecute SEPTA crimes. And I think, frankly, that's a brilliant idea on the legislature's part, because they said, look, we have a multi-county agency, so we have jurisdiction. And I think, SEPTA crimes are a big part of making people feel safe. I was actually doing an interview yesterday with a Temple University reporter. Mm-hmm. And I said, we talked about this idea of making SEPTA safe, because if you're at the Temple campus, for those of you who don't know, the Temple campus is, maybe 40 blocks north of Center City. If the subway is feeling safe, you can hop on the subway and you can be in the center of Philadelphia, or 20 minutes you can be down at the stadiums. It connects that campus to a very vibrant city just south of it. Right. And if you don't feel safe getting on the subway, either during the day or at night. So I would, one of the things I would do very quickly is appoint that special prosecutor. And that first deputy that I would appoint would be somebody that I'd say, okay, who's good. Right. Let's go find somebody really good who's going to make sure that happens.
We'll wrap things up with a couple of quick questions. Your stance on legalizing marijuana in the Commonwealth?
Yeah, it's interesting. I think, I was never really a pot smoker, even though I grew up in the 80s. So I was never a big fan of it, but I do recognize that it's just not worth the effort to criminalize. I think it's time to, in my view, legalize it, regulate it, treat it like we treat the state stores as a revenue source for the Commonwealth. Mm-hmm. I just think that makes sense. I mean, I think also if you look, competitively as a Commonwealth, the states around us have all begun to legalize. So I think we've moved in that direction, even though me personally, doesn't make me super comfortable, but I think it's probably the right thing to do.
Artificial intelligence is on the rise throughout the country, certainly in Pennsylvania. Is there anything that the Attorney General needs to do to tamp down on its potential impact?
Well, I think AI is an amazing development. And like any other breakthroughs and the things we've seen in our lifetime, I think AI is going to change the way we live our lives. And I do think government has a role. I think there should be regulation. I think, I'll admit we don't know enough about how to regulate this because it seems benign, but I think government needs to step in there and say, okay, how do we use this to help us without creating something that's dangerous?
Give you an opportunity for a closing statement.
Sure. Steve, I appreciate being here. Just a couple thoughts. What I didn't have a chance to touch on is my background in healthcare. And I, having had a background in healthcare, my other concern as Attorney General is the for-profit hospitals acquiring nonprofit hospitals. When I was in the governor's office, we were dealing with this issue years ago, which is making sure there was access in all sorts of places around the Commonwealth. And although I think it's important that sometimes those deals have to happen, the Attorney General has to have the experience to know what to do with that. And when I say that, I mean, if that has to happen, there needs to be a consent order. And that consent order has to be detailed to protect both healthcare access for people as well as jobs. And I guess, just to wrap it up, I'm the only person running in this race that can be a true independent. I bring both the public sector and the private sector experience to the job. It's an important job. This is a Commonwealth that means a lot to our country. I would like to be an independent Attorney General that makes sure is that the outcome of our election coming up is fair and otherwise be a place where people want to live. And my family grew up here and I've grown up here, and it would be a privilege to serve the people of the Commonwealth. So, Steve, thank you.
Eric Settle, Forward Party candidate for Attorney General for the Commonwealth of Pennsylvania. Thank you so much for joining us today on our Keystone Candidate Forum. We appreciate it.
Thanks, Steve.
I'm Steve Ulrich. Thanks for watching. For Politics PA and Broad and Liberty, My name is Steve Ulrich. Welcome to the Keystone Candidate Forum. Today, we're speaking with Democratic candidate for Pennsylvania Attorney General Eugene DePasquale. I'm joined by Alex Halper, the Senior VP for Government Affairs with the Pennsylvania Chamber of Business and Industry. Eugene, we'll open with you. Just a couple of opening statements, perhaps, on why you want to be Attorney General in the Commonwealth of Pennsylvania.
Look, I believe that particularly in this moment, we need someone with a track record of protecting Pennsylvanians, someone who's run a complicated state agency and has done it in a tough and fair way across the board. My name is Eugene DePasquale. I'm the former Auditor General of the state. I ran a complicated state agency and conducted statewide investigations, including my investigation that found over 3,000 untested rape kits. My investigation that found 58,000 unanswered phone calls to the child abuse hotline. My investigation that found a lot of abuses in the lack of safety in our nursing home industry, and also, was tough and fair on a Republican governor and tough and fair on a Democratic governor, including my COVID audit of Governor Wolf that found that how they were deciding some businesses could stay open and some couldn't stay open was problematic, and that if we ever have to go through that again, we've got to make sure that the legislature and the governor have a fair process. So I've been tough and fair across the board, and that's why the Philadelphia Inquirer endorsed me in the primary and the general election, because they said, particularly in these partisan polarized times, we need someone who's the state's top attorney, top prosecutor, who isn't a partisan warrior, and that's exactly what I am. I'm tough and fair across the board.
Well, thank you very much, Eugene. It's great to have you today. You have worked with our organization, the PA Chamber, for years, dating back to your time as a state representative. I remember working on some business tax policy, but we really appreciate you joining us today. So the PA Chamber, we represent Pennsylvania's business community. We don't always think about the office of the Attorney General from an economic and a kind of business community, business climate, and competitiveness standpoint. But we have seen over the years how attorneys general do impact the economy. They are part of an overall business climate, in particular their interactions with employers. How do you view the role of the attorney general as it relates to the economy of our Commonwealth, as it relates to overall business competitiveness?
So for starters, look, the Attorney General does not set tax policy, does not create regulations, but we do enforce the law. So that would mean that if somebody's cheating on their taxes, for example, the Attorney General can weigh in and conduct an investigation. If you have a situation where there is a regulation that's not being enforced by the department, the Attorney General can weigh in. Whether that is, giving unfair advantages to one business over the other, certainly the Attorney General plays a role in that. But the Attorney General does not set tax policy or spending policy, but does make sure the law is being followed.
While you've overseen a large Commonwealth agency and as Auditor General, your Republican opponent says that you've never tried a case in a courtroom, you're not a prosecutor. What's your response to that?
Look, the Attorney General's office enforces laws all across the spectrum, whether it be criminal law, civil law, public corruption, environmental law, labor law, protecting our seniors, Medicaid fraud. These are all areas that I have been involved with. So I have a broad-based experience in many facets of law, including even being a state constitutional law professor. And so when you talk about experience, I've run a complicated state agency. I know what it's like to conduct statewide investigations. The Attorney General is not in the courtroom. They are someone that is leading an agency, setting priorities, hiring the right staff, and making sure that you're carrying out the wishes of the people of this state. And my background is very similar to the now Governor, former Attorney General Josh Shapiro. We both served on the Judiciary Committee in the legislature. We were both fellow row officers. He was a Montgomery County Commissioner. Before he was elected Attorney General, I was obviously the Auditor General as running for Attorney General. So our backgrounds are very similar, and I think he did a very good job at it, and I know I will as well if the voters elect me.
One of the things that Governor Shapiro did as Attorney General, and he touts oftentimes, is he was 43-0 against former President Donald Trump in lawsuits that were filed against the Commonwealth when it came to the 2020 election. Where do you stand on election integrity throughout the Commonwealth?
So I got asked this the other night in our only statewide televised debate. Now, we've had a couple other candidate forums. I think we've got at least one more coming up, but it was our only statewide televised forum where Dennis Owen specifically brought up that Republicans tout my investigation that I did into the Department of State in 2019. And that showed specifically that I was willing to take on a tough investigation, even against when it came to a Democratic administration. What we found was there were significant weaknesses in the security system of our state's voter registration database. We worked together with the Department of State and a bipartisan coalition in Harrisburg to make sure that we had a more secure voter registration database. I also investigated county elections offices all across the state, seeing some of them, whether, again, they be Republican or Democratic counties, were getting trips paid for by the vendors that they were then hiring to have their voting machines. And I cracked down on that. And I think that that had a significant impact on us having better, more secure voting machines in various counties across the Commonwealth. I do believe we have a secure system, but on the same token, I'm not the Attorney General now. If I am elected, my job will be to make sure that we have as secure a system as possible, and also make sure that every voter who's legally allowed to vote and cast that vote has that vote counted accurately. It is the job of the voters to pick the winner of these elections, not the job of the lawyers. My job will be there to be calling balls and strikes.
Let's turn to the role of the Attorney General in combating crime, and in particular, retail crime. The U.S. Chamber a few years ago put out a report which showed that Pennsylvania employers lose over $7 billion a year as a result of retail crime. And that's a combination of the goods that are lost, higher insurance costs, and otherwise. Part of the response, and we supported from the legislature and from Governor Shapiro, was Act 42 of 2023, which creates an office of organized retail crime within the office of the Attorney General. Interested your thoughts on combating crime more generally, but on behalf of businesses, combating retail theft specifically.
So I'm going to start off with, we were a small business family. My parents owned a bar and restaurant. And there was a couple mornings on the way to school, because it was actually close to where I went to elementary school, where there was at least 2 instances where on the way to elementary school, my mom found out that the bar was robbed. Now, look, robbery is not okay at any level, but when you are a small business, whether it's $200 or $300 or more, that is a dramatic impact on your bottom line. So retail theft is serious. And as Attorney General, I will make sure that people that commit it will be punished. It is important that we protect our small businesses, and any business, but the ones that are most dramatically impact on the retail theft be small businesses, and certainly from the retail side of it, some of your shopping centers, et cetera. There has been some DAs that have not made this a priority. That's why it has been given to the Attorney General to crack down on this. I will make it a high priority. I know what this does to businesses, but it also costs workers jobs, because if it jacks up your insurance rates, that money's coming from somewhere. So you're either going to raise prices on the consumers, or you're going to have to get rid of staff, or in some instances, both. So it's the right thing to do to crack down on this for the business owner, but also for the employer and the consumer as well. This is a high priority and something I will vigorously enforce as Attorney General.
Certainly in the national discussion, oil and gas producing state that Pennsylvania is with fracking, energy is very much on the ballot. Recently, Vice President Harris has called on oil and gas companies to, quote unquote, pay the price for climate change. And some states, including municipalities like Bucks County, are trying to make the industry pay the price by bringing lawsuits over their role in contributing to climate change. Would you support a similar lawsuit on behalf of the Commonwealth?
That is not a direction I'm looking to go. Look, I am pro Pennsylvania energy. Climate change is real, and we all have to play our part. I passed the Alternative Energy Investment Act. When I passed that as a member of the General Assembly, that vote passed with 181 voter members of the legislature, which means I built a bipartisan coalition on that. Look, if I see any company, whether they be Pennsylvania Energy or not, specifically polluting our water, polluting our air, that's something that I will crack down on. But I'm not just going, look, that is a policy initiative. That's something for the governor, the legislature, and obviously if the Congress wants to do something like that. But climate change is real, but we've got to make sure that we have an all of the above strategy to tackle that. That's why I believe we not only have to have fracking in the state, but we've got to do it in a safe, reliable way with common sense regulations. I believe that we have to have more nuclear in the state. And I know the idea of building more nuclear plants is probably, a pipe dream, but, we could refire TMI. I know there is discussion of that. I think that we can do in all of the above strategy and also having solar and wind and doing more research and development to help us get there and work on more energy efficiency along the way. I think that's the way to do this. Simply punishing companies is not going to get us there.
Yeah, I wanted to. We talked a little bit, Eugene, about Governor Shapiro during his time as Attorney General. I'm curious if you have reviewed the tenures of previous attorneys general in Pennsylvania or other state attorneys generals around the country, and if you have specific examples of how those predecessors are informing your thoughts on approaching that position, ideas, or something that you would borrow or steal from other attorneys general.
Well, I think there's one particular attorney general that was elected in 2012. I'll try to avoid those practices. But I think specifically when it comes to Governor Shapiro, I think his work on taking a more activist role in protecting Pennsylvanians in some of these fights, particularly, again, not to revisit that particular issue, but the way he took on the fight with the Catholic Church and the pedophile priest as someone who is Catholic and knows that happened to friends of mine growing up, and as someone who's a former altar boy, I think that was a fight worth taking on. I think Governor Corbett, when his time as Attorney General, cracking down on corruption, I think that was, again, a worthwhile cause. If you go into this worried about the politics of it, you're not going to be an effective Attorney General. I believe you do the best job you can, take on the fights that you believe need taking on, and then let the politics take care of itself after that.
Let me follow up on the politics. As Attorney General, obviously you'll work with the 67 district attorneys throughout the Commonwealth, but let's call out one in particular, Philadelphia District Attorney Larry Krasner, and his policies have been certainly under fire as a progressive prosecutor. Do you think that what is happening to him in terms of the prosecution that he's undergoing right now is fair?
Look, there are specific areas where I disagree with the district attorney, Larry Krasner, particularly on the retail theft is one where I think he's even made some adjustments because I think, again, I don't want to speak for him. I think he even knows he went too far on that. But my job as Attorney General will be to work with all 67 DAs, including the district attorney of Philadelphia and all other 67 across the state. That will be the job that I'll do. I did a similar type of thing when I was Auditor General, building coalitions across the state. I will do the same thing as Attorney General. And if somebody is not doing their job and not protecting Pennsylvanians, no matter who they are, no matter where they are, I'll step in and use every tool in the toolbox I can to make sure that we're protecting Pennsylvanians in every single part of the state.
Eugene, you mentioned obviously the Office of the Attorney General is not a policy-making entity, but obviously the office does interact considerably with the General Assembly, and I'm curious from your time as a state representative, how do you feel those two, the General Assembly and the Office of the Attorney General, how should they work together? How could they work together better? And what would your approach be to those relationships?
I think specific way to, I have good relationships across the aisle. Now, it's a campaign season, I get it, but I know how to work with everybody, and even some people that are on the far right and far left. I've always had a good relationship because as the Attorney General, similar as Auditor General, your job is to basically go out there and be the representative of the people, regardless of party, when you're out there. So I have no concern about being able to do that. Now, when it comes to specific interactions, I believe that where the Attorney General can be most impactful is someone that is enforcing the law, find out where gaps exist, where people of Pennsylvania are not being appropriately protected. Say, for example, and I'm just using this example right now, with AI, I don't believe the legislature has caught up to where we are as a society, and that would be both Congress and the state legislature. I think updating our laws to give the Attorney General the tools that are necessary to protect Pennsylvanians when it comes to AI is a discussion we need to have. And that's something where you have a frank discussion with the legislature and say, look, you've got to update this set of laws or this law, got to give me the tools to do this. Or, that's how that discussion should go. And then the legislature weighs it just like they would any other proposal. And also, if there's a area where the legislature believes and we have a discussion on it and we agree, you also can ask for more budgets, higher budgets, so you can hire the staff to specifically tackle a set of problems.
Let me follow up on the AI question. Would you throw social media and its impact on children as a discussion that the legislature needs to have sooner than later?
Oh, look, my kids are a little older now, 24 and 21, but they came of age, particularly my daughter, who's our youngest, as social media was starting to creep in on everyone's phone. Look, I am concerned about the mental health impact of this stuff. Now, look, I'm not for banning this stuff. I don't believe prohibition works, but I do believe that there is a real possibility that they know what their algorithms are doing to our young people. And similar to where big tobacco was specifically targeting our kids and knew the harm they were doing, I believe it is worth asking the questions whether social media companies know exactly what they're doing to our kids' brains. And we need to make sure that we are getting to the bottom of that. Because I know when I say I know a lot of these CEOs, I don't know them personally, but they have said on the record on many occasions, they do not let their own children use these things. So that to me leads me to believe that they know the dangers of this. We have to make sure that we are protecting our kids. Look, when you become an adult, if you want to do that stuff, that's a different example. But we need to make sure that they are not intentionally harming our children.
Following up on the business community more generally, and I think it's clear and it's bipartisan that the business community and employers in many cases feel under attack with some of the public dialogue and the way the business community is often portrayed. What's your pitch to employers who are watching, to business leaders, for why you would be the best candidate for Attorney General?
Look, the best way to predict how someone's going to behave in the future is what they did in the past. And I get it. I'm running for the first time. I'm a Democrat. I know most businesses tend to lean more conservative, more Republican. Again, I'm not saying that as a condemn or condone. That's just the reality of it. So when I ran for re-election to state auditor, I was the only candidate in Pennsylvania that year that received the Pennsylvania Business Roundtable endorsement and the Pennsylvania AFL-CIO endorsement. Why? Because they saw my 4 years in office and they know the job I did, which was looking out for all Pennsylvanians, whether they be Republican or Democrat, liberal, moderate, or conservative. That's the same type of approach I'll take as Attorney General. Look, I get it. It's campaign season and people fall into their ideological bubbles. But I guarantee if I'm the Attorney General, people will see the work I did. They'll say, I was fair and tough at the same time.
We'll wrap things. I have one final question, but we'll save it for after. An opportunity for you to give a closing statement.
Yeah, I just, first of all, thank you to everyone for tuning in, and also thank you for the opportunity. My name is Eugene DePasquale, and I want to be your Attorney General. You've seen my record as Auditor General conducting tough statewide investigations, but I also bring values into this office. It's a value knowing what it's like to have a dad wounded in Vietnam, shot twice in the right leg and once in the left, who then ended up battling addiction and started dealing and had a 10.5-year federal prison sentence, knowing that in some ways we have to take this war on drugs and turn it into a battle against addiction. That's why taking on this opioid crisis is personal to me. I also know what it's like to struggle. My brother Anthony had muscular dystrophy. And because of that, we never had health insurance when we were kids. So having and making sure that the laws are followed and consumers get a fair shake, that's also something that I'll bring as a value into office. And also, I want to be very blunt about this, because regardless of what people view, because I know this is, I don't know how everyone stands on when it comes to reproductive freedom, but when it comes to reproductive freedom, I am pro-choice. Our family had to deal with an ectopic pregnancy at week 10. That procedure is now illegal in 5 states. So I'm going to protect reproductive freedom for the women of Pennsylvania, and for any woman running away from one of those laws that's coming here, I'll protect it from them for them as well, because I believe that we should not have the government standing between a woman and her doctor. And finally, I believe the priorities of the next Attorney General need to be safe communities, protecting consumers, being balanced, tough and fair across the board, and protecting reproductive freedom. I have a record of holding my campaign promises. I have a record of being tough and fair across the board, and that's the exact type of leadership I'll bring as your Attorney General.
Thank you very much. Final question, the most hard-hitting question that I have as a Phillies fan. I believe that the Pirates belong in the NL East, not the NL Central. I know the Attorney General can't do anything about that, but your thoughts?
If I could, I would certainly file a lawsuit against that. But the Pirates lost a lot of rivalries it wasn't just the Phillies that we lost. The Pirates had a real rivalry with the Mets as well. And I think the fans wanted that. And look, I get that Pittsburgh is, more Midwest than East, but by doing that, you really carved out the rivalries. And let's put it like this. As a fan, I want to see the Pirates play the Phillies more. And I want to see the Pirates play the Mets more. The Pirates and Mets, during the 80s, it was a hated rivalry. The Pirates also had a rivalry with the Braves as well. So Major League Baseball, I think, has done some good things by putting the clocks in. I think that has sped up the game. But I think we need to do a better job of getting these rivalries going as well.
At a time when, a lot of candidates, it's become cliche to talk about, being the candidate of hope. The fact, Eugene, that you're still decked out in your Pirates gear, I give you a lot of credit. And as a fellow Phillies fan who's still just bumming about how our postseason played out, I do have to give you credit for, rocking the black and gold with pride.
Hey, I'm not pretending anything. This is who I am. And by the way, as an Eagles fan, at least you know who's going to be your quarterback this week.
And on that note, here are the types of things we have in our Keystone Candidate Forum. Our thanks to former Auditor General Eugene DePasquale, Democratic candidate for Pennsylvania Attorney General. Thank you for joining us today.
Thanks for having me, guys. Really appreciate it.
And thank you for joining us on another of our series of the Keystone Candidate Forum. For Alex Halper, I'm Steve Ulrich. For Politics, PA, and Broad and Liberty, my name is Steve Ulrich. Welcome to the Keystone Candidate Forum. I'm joined by Senior Vice President for Governmental Affairs with the Pennsylvania Chamber of Business and Industry, Alex Halper. And today we're joined by Republican candidate for Pennsylvania Attorney General, Dave Sunday. Dave, thank you very much for joining us today.
It's great to be here. Thank you for having me.
First question, to throw out to you, why would you like to be Attorney General for the Commonwealth of Pennsylvania?
Sure. So by way of background, I grew up in central Pennsylvania. And as a kid, I had no idea what I wanted to do with my life. I'm sure that no one else out there has had that scenario. And so when I turned 18, I just went and I joined the Navy. I was an enlisted guy. I was a young man, and I swabbed decks and I chipped paint. And I was deployed all throughout the world. So I was in the Persian Gulf during Desert Strike. I spent a lot of time in Central and South America doing counter-drug operations where we boarded drug runner ships and tried to stop drugs from coming up to the United States. I came home from the Navy, and then I didn't have a college degree at that point, and I really didn't know what to do, and so I started working at UPS. I did my entire undergraduate studies during the day, and I worked at UPS at night. And then I worked at UPS during the day, and I went to law school at night. And so I always talk about those first 12 years, 4 years enlisted in the Navy, and 8 years at UPS during college and law school, because the people I worked with were some of the hardest working people you could ever imagine. And that foundation really grew into the leader that I became today. And also a lot of my criminal justice policies grew from that as well. I met my wife right out of law school. She is from Sri Lanka. And so she moved here when she was 2. She's a naturalized citizen. We have a wonderful son who just turned 10 a couple days ago. I got a job as a law clerk for a judge in York. That's how I ended up in York. And then I went right into the DA's office. So I'm going into my 17th year in York County. As a prosecutor in the DA's office, I spent most of my time in a courtroom for most of my career. And Steve, I know you're familiar with York, but for those that aren't, we have one of the biggest district attorney's offices in the state. And we're directly north of Baltimore. And so for a long period of time, Baltimore was the heroin capital of the United States. And because there's an open air drug market in Baltimore, it has had a tremendously bad impact on York County with addiction. And so I ran our major crimes unit. I ran our felony drug unit. I was chief of litigation. For 4 years, I was a special appointed United States attorney, where we did large-scale gang conspiracy cases in federal court. Like we had a huge operation where we went after a gang called the Latin Kings, where we arrested and indicted 100 of them in one operation. And so I then was elected district attorney and then reelected DA. I'm a career homicide prosecutor. So I've spent most of my time in the courtroom looking at juries and asking them to return verdicts, holding people accountable. At the same time, when you look at the Attorney General's office and you look at the issues facing Pennsylvania, we not only need that accountability through an experienced prosecutor, but at the same time, we have to embrace redemption for people that have substance abuse issues, behavioral health issues, and people that have been incarcerated. And this is a really important part of who I am and why I'm running. So to start with the opioid epidemic, we've been at this for over 10 years now in York. And not only have I held drug traffickers accountable by prosecuting them, but at the same time, we actually started a nonprofit, the York Opioid Collaborative, where we work with everyone in the community to increase access to treatment, to help work on stigma for people with addiction, and to do everything we can so that people don't overdose and die. I'm often asked about, as a DA, what some of the emotional experiences have been for me. And I'm going to tell you guys right now, there is no suffering that exists in this world close to it, like a parent who slowly watches their child slip away into the web of addiction. And I mean, these parents, hundreds of them every night, are sitting at home desperately afraid that there'll be a knock on the door from a coroner, a call from the police. And so we fought that relentlessly. Right now, 15 people die every day in Pennsylvania from overdose deaths. And I believe that if our community is not safe, nothing else matters. So we attack that head on. Then at the same time, we realize, hey, we have a behavioral health crisis. Our prisons are full of people that have mental illness. And that is, our prisons have essentially become the de facto mental health provider in Pennsylvania. And not only is that morally wrong, it has increased crime dramatically. And so through the work that we do collaboratively in York, we've worked with WellSpan, we've worked with business all throughout the community, we've worked with schools, we work with the faith-based community, and we set up a whole program where we actually help people that are in mental health crisis go directly into have an assessment and treatment. And we can come back to that. The third prong of this, and this is really important as well, especially for the chamber, because this directly impacts the mission of a lot of businesses. And, when I worked at UPS, I realized I work with people that were on parole, probation, work release, and they're some of the hardest workers that I've ever seen. And I'm going to tell you guys, there is magic that happens when someone realizes that they have the power within themselves to change their lives, where they have a career job, where they're saving money, where they're paying their bills, paying their taxes, where they're being promoted. That is how we ultimately will achieve public safety in Pennsylvania. 95% of everyone that goes into prison will come back out of prison. 95%, they will return home. And so we started this robust reentry coalition where we have people that work every day to help people returning home from prison. This isn't let people out early. This is after they've been held accountable to help put them in a position where they can get jobs. The data is overwhelming that when someone works, the odds of them committing more crimes goes down drastically. It keeps families together. It helps employers find employees, and it generally increases the well-being of society. We've lowered our crime rate by 41% in York County, and that has been through all of these initiatives, holding people accountable, but at the same time embracing redemption and fighting to help people with behavioral health issues and mental health and substance abuse issues. I love what I do. I am running for Attorney General because I know that if we have safe communities, then we're going to be in a much better position. I am very, very fearful of the world my son has to grow up in. I have seen behind the curtain on what's going on the internet with child predators, how they're trying to get to our kids every single day, how artificial intelligence has increased the likelihood of that dramatically, how AI and the internet have increased the likelihood of seniors getting scammed. I've seen the impact of all this on our community, and that's why I'm running for Attorney General. because I know that if communities aren't safe, nothing else matters.
Dave, I'm glad you brought up the issue of criminal justice reform. That's an area where the PA Chamber and your office have worked together. Something that the PA Chamber historically over our 100 plus years of existence, not something we were very much involved in, but increasingly saw that this population of individuals leaving incarceration or with criminal records, helping to facilitate their employment was very much part of an overall workforce strategy in Pennsylvania. So I appreciate you elaborating on how your office coordinated with businesses on that important mission. And I'd like to ask to kind of expounding on that theme of your interaction with the business community. As an organization, we have 10,000 business members throughout the Commonwealth. We don't always think of the Office of the Attorney General from an economic and business climate perspective, but we have seen how attorneys general do impact the economy and do impact Pennsylvania's competitiveness through their interactions with employers. At times, what has been a hostile relationship with employers. I'm curious your thoughts on how the Office of the Attorney General and how you as Attorney General would approach your role as impacting Pennsylvania's economy and trying to improve our business competitiveness.
So I appreciate that question. And to begin with, when you look at the initiatives I talked about very briefly in my intro, and I could talk about them for hours, trust me, but I won't do that to your viewers and listeners. But these initiatives that have completely changed our community, which lowered our homicide rate by 75%, our gang gun violence rate by 80%, overdoses by 26%. These are all things that have been done through a collaborative spirit, through collaborative work. And most of them involve collaborating with the business community. Everything we do impacts each other. And when you look at the criminal justice system, when we have people when you look at society, when you have people that are addicted to heroin, now fentanyl, those are individuals who are not coming to work. Those are people who are oftentimes not paying taxes. Those are people who, when they do come to work, there's tons of workplace injuries that happen as a result of it. Those are individuals, there's a tremendous opportunity cost to society for all of these people that are suffering with all of these issues. Same thing with the mental health crisis. We have done amazing things in helping people get mental health treatment, which lowers crime and increases their ability to be gainfully employed through collaborative partnerships, for example, with WellSpan, which is our regional healthcare provider. And it's not only saved WellSpan money, but it has made our community safer. There is no question about it. About 70% of all of our crime in Pennsylvania is either directly or tangentially related to substance abuse and mental health. And when we have a society of people that are that incarcerated, okay, then we are obviously harming their ability to be employees. I have seen so many people come out of prison that we've helped that have gone on to become just unbelievably successful entrepreneurs who've started their own businesses, who are contractors, landscapers, welders, HVAC, you name it, everything. And so the collective impact of that success benefits all of society. And when you look at businesses are not a player on the bench during this. Businesses are on the floor. They are some of the main partners in the work that we've done to make our community safer, not only from employing people, but from being investors in our community and investors in all of this. We work hand in hand with our business community. If I'm elected Attorney General, I'm going to view the chamber and business in Pennsylvania as my partners in these efforts. I want to collaborate with everyone because this benefits when crime goes down, community well-being goes up. And when people can work and when they can make money and when they can take care of their family and when that spirit, that American spirit of bettering yourself and increasing your place in life. I'm an example. I am an example of the American dream. I started out, I was struggling before I joined the Navy. And I worked so hard, and UPS, a business, gave me a chance. And the whole time I was there, I just saw that through hard work, I can do amazing things. And that's the experience that I carry through to this place right now. And so I'm not sure if that exactly answered your question, but I view the business community as a partner in what we do to make our community safer. If our community is safer, it increases the well-being of citizens, it increases business outcomes, and it all just compounds on each other for a better society. And so that's how I feel about that.
Dave, let me expand on the safer communities aspect. Let's talk about gun control. What are your thoughts on gun control, assault rifles? Do schools need more school resource officers for their protection for the community? Your overall thoughts when it comes to the Second Amendment and gun control?
So that's a great question. So to begin with, I like to focus my answers on a lot of these issues on outcomes. And what I mean by that is I've learned this as the elected chief law enforcement officer for a county, that citizens are really, and I don't blame them, and I mean, I'm a citizen, I feel the same way, are really at their wits' end with political fighting, okay? And one of the ways that we have achieved what we've achieved in York is through collaborative partnerships where we don't even discuss politics. We don't talk about our political parties. We discuss what are the data-driven, evidence-based efforts that we can do together to have this return. So with that foundation, York County used to have a tremendous problem with gang violence. And when you look at, and so when we look at that, as district attorney, my job with regard to gun violence, we always say that we want to have more graduations and less funerals. And in 2016, we started the Group Violence Initiative. The Group Violence Initiative is a collaborative approach to lowering gun violence. And so what we did was, there's three prongs to it. Number one, you have to have effective law enforcement. Okay, you have to have effective law enforcement strategies, utilizing grand jury investigations, utilizing all of your tools and resources. I mean, and I've worked hand in hand in large, huge cases with the FBI, the DEA, ATF, state police, everybody in between. But just as importantly, you have to have the community engagement. That is unbelievably critical. Number three, all of the service providers have to work together. And so when we look at that, we have collectively had outcomes where our homicide rate has dropped by 75% from 2022 to 23. And anyone watching this that wants to learn more about it, Google it, go online and look up York County Group Violence Initiative. We have an annual report you can look at. Our gang gun violence rate has dropped by 80%. Think about that, 80%. And data from our hospital in York has indicated that people showing up with gunshot wounds has dropped by over half. And so when we talk about gun violence and we talk about the people that are being shot, and we discuss how can we make our community safer, we could debate till the end of days legislation. What we chose to do, and the approach that I will bring to the state, is we chose to get into a room, look at the tools we had, and apply data-driven, evidence-based initiatives to this. And that has resulted in one of the most drastic decreases of gang gun violence and homicides in Pennsylvania. And that's my approach, because at the end of the day, legislators make the law. And my job is to enforce the law. And if I spend all of my time, trying to be a legislator, that's a waste, because I'm being hired to get the job done. And so that's my approach that I will bring as Attorney General with regard to gun violence.
Sticking with the topic of crime, and I'd like to focus on retail crime specifically. Employers in Pennsylvania, businesses, small businesses, really seeing a surge in retail crime. In some cases, probably petty shoplifting, but also organized retail crime rings that are clearly organized and are increasingly hurting Pennsylvania businesses. A report from the U.S. Chamber a few years ago estimated that Pennsylvania businesses lose over $7 billion a year through retail theft, and that's loss of the products, it's increased insurance costs, it's also unrealized wages from workers. It's not just hurting the businesses, but the workers as well. We supported legislation that the General Assembly passed, that Governor Shapiro signed, that created a new office of organized retail crime in the Attorney General's office. Curious your thoughts, Dave, on the issue of retail crime specifically. How do we go about combating this increase in retail theft?
So to start with, I want to thank the Chamber and the governor for signing for that legislation and signing that into law. So as a prosecutor, I've dealt with this for a long time. And we actually so Pennsylvania's got a corrupt organization statute. That's essentially the state RICO statute. And we have gone after large scale organized retail theft groups by using that statute. And this is an unbelievably important issue, and I take it very seriously. And as Attorney General, I will do everything I can to maximize the resources of the organized retail theft unit to make Pennsylvania safer. And think about that, safer. So when you talk about organized retail theft, it's much bigger than just the objects that are stolen from a store. What we know is that a lot of the I'll say organized crime that's driving organized retail theft, they are also involved in human trafficking. They're involved in drug trafficking. They're involved in organized retail theft. And so these cases are exceedingly important, not only to make sure that businesses don't have to be in a position where they have to go out of business, but to protect our community. Because when you start investigating these cases and you do it in the right way, and you do thorough criminal investigations, most of the people committing these crimes on the level, like the floor level, are people that are suffering from drug addiction. These are people that are being trafficked, human trafficked. And so when you can do these right and you work your way up the chain, you can ultimately arrest and prosecute the people that are making the money off of this and are driving this crime. This is much more than someone taking a few items from a store. These are organized criminal groups that are using people that are addicted to drugs and people that are being trafficked to do this so that they can make money. I think this is an extremely serious issue. I take it serious. I always have as a DA, and I will take it very serious as Attorney General.
Let me shift gears and talk about something near and dear to my heart, election integrity. Up until 2020, it seems though the American public felt pretty comfortable about how elections were tabulated and the results were given out. Is there a role for the Pennsylvania Attorney General to reestablish faith among the electorate that elections are safe and secure?
Yeah, I think so, absolutely. I mean, to begin with, I'm asked, how does the Attorney General protect democracy? And I think that the most important way the AG and our DAs can protect democracy is by enforcing the rule of law. And so to begin with, I was the elected DA in New York in 2020. And as an elected DA, like the DAs are on the ground level of this. And so when people do file criminal complaints, even administrative complaints, oftentimes it makes its way to the district attorney. And so what I learned very quickly was, so to begin with, our elections are the fundamental building block of our democracy. And it is incumbent upon all of us, every single one of us, to do everything we can to make sure that people can vote, that they can vote safely, that the votes are counted, and that the citizens trust the outcomes. And I think one of the first ways that we can do that is by making sure that all of the police, the prosecutors, everybody in Pennsylvania understands how to enforce the law. And you do it, so the DA's Association, as I know both of you are well aware, is a bipartisan group. And I'm very blessed to be on the executive board, and I'm chair of education and training. And we've begun training the DAs across Pennsylvania on the election law. There's a concept in criminal justice, and it's called procedural justice. And what it means very simply is that when people understand the process, when it's transparent, when they understand why you do what you do, then they are far more likely to accept an outcome, even if they disagree with it. And I think that's where we went awry during all of this. And so very simply, I think the Attorney General should work with everybody, meaning district attorneys, police, legislators, the governor. And I think that we all need to collaboratively work together to do what we can to make sure that people can vote safely, that their votes are counted, that people understand what the process is. And the way we do that is, and whether you're the Attorney General or a district attorney, because they're both chief law enforcement officers, politics can never enter the room when you're making decisions. When you can never let that happen. Your decisions have to be based on the facts and the law. And so to that point, we protect democracy by enforcing the rule of law, regardless. And you may remember this actually, but in 2020, we did a public service announcement where it was me and all the police chiefs in New York. And we put it out and we essentially said, listen, it doesn't matter what, people can Google it and find it, by the way, but you can say, we said, it doesn't matter what political party you are. It doesn't matter who you want to win, who you don't want to win. The expectation is that everyone will do this safely, that you will follow the law, and you will accept the outcome when it's over. And we would accept nothing less. And that's the same philosophy that I would bring to the Attorney General's office.
Well, I'm thinking about bipartisanship, and it feels like in a lot of ways your county is kind of a microcosm of Pennsylvania overall. You have an urban center, you have suburban areas, you have rural areas, and in your position as DA, interacting with all these local elected officials and local law enforcement has required you to operate in a bipartisan way. We are in a period in state government and the state legislature with divided government, with razor thin majorities, and in the Senate, in the House, and a close majority, close in the Senate as well. How do you see yourself bringing lessons you've learned at the local level, working across the aisle and really in a nonpartisan way, bringing that type of approach to a statewide office? Is it seamless, bringing that type of a mentality, or how do you see it the same? How do you see it different?
So a couple points I want to make. The first one is, when I was in the Navy, I was on a ship with, I think, 240 sailors. I think there was 240 of us on the ship. And we were from every potential different walk of life, from different states, different ethnic backgrounds, just completely different group of people. And we had a common mission. And we worked together in a manner that was just fantastic. We worked together every day. We were a team. We supported each other. We may have disagreed on a lot of things, but we had a common goal and a common mission. And so we worked together and we achieved it. That's the attitude that I brought to my office as district attorney, and same thing that I'll bring as Attorney General. At the end of the day, when you're talking about public safety and you're talking about children, I say this all the time, but when we were kids, if you made a mistake, you might have a hangover. In today's world, the margin for error is so slim, and children can die with one mistake. When you're talking about such fundamental things like that and family, nobody wants to hear political arguments. Like, nobody does, and nobody should. And so I've never treated my office that way. And the one thing I have learned over time, I'm sitting here on this Zoom call with you guys, and the path that brought me here was, through the Navy, working at UPS, and being in a courtroom prosecuting cases. And I didn't come to this place through partisan politics. And what I have learned along the way is I can't control other people, but I can control myself. and I can control how I treat people, and I can control the way that I handle situations that come to me. And that's worked very well for me. And I would advise that to everybody out there that's watching or listening to this. And so just as DA, as Attorney General, I'm going to act the way that I feel like society should act. And that's how I'm going to be with everybody. You know, we're human beings. And so there are times where we will disagree, but there's ways to disagree as professionals where when you're done, you know, you shake hands and you walk away. That's how it is in a court of law. Like, we advocate and fight hard in a court for cases. But when it's over, we respect each other. We appreciate the skills that we have. We talk about our families. We have a lot more in common than we do that keeps us apart. I mean, I am the eternal optimist. And so I firmly believe that our best days are ahead.
We're speaking with York County District Attorney Dave Sunday, the Republican candidate for Pennsylvania Attorney General. Dave, anything that you'd like to emphasize in a closing statement, maybe something that we did not cover so far today?
I think we've covered a lot. I mean, the reality is this: the Attorney General is Pennsylvania's chief law enforcement officer. That's by statute. And every case that you deal with, be it civil or criminal, could ultimately lead to a courtroom and could lead to a jury. And so I think it is critical that we have an experienced attorney, let alone an experienced prosecutor, to do this job. You know, what I want to bring to this office is public safety and things that are challenging right now in Pennsylvania. Obviously, the opioid epidemic, now fentanyl, is one of the most deadly crises we've ever seen. And that's an absolute priority for me. The mental health crisis is a complete and total absolute priority. As we work through that, we have organized crime. We touched on it with organized retail theft. But at the same time, it is unbelievably important that we get ahead of this with regard to social media and artificial intelligence and how the internet and technology is being used to bypass parents and go directly to children. If your child is on a gaming system, if they're on social media, someone will try to get to them. And I think it is critical that the Attorney General prioritize protecting children. At the same time, you know, we have one of the highest populations of senior citizens of the aging community in the country. And God willing, all of us will be there someday. And I think that the way that we treat senior citizens is a reflection on who we are as a society. And it is incumbent that the Attorney General focuses on these public safety issues, protecting seniors, protecting kids. And that's why I'm doing this. I mean, this is mission-based for me. I feel very strongly about the things we're talking about today. I'm like I said, the eternal optimist, and I have no doubt that working together as a team, Pennsylvania, we can do amazing things. And so it's just great to be here with you. I'm honored to be here, and I thank you for having me.
Now, one more final important question. I'm assuming that as a Navy man, the two most important words in December are beat Army. What are your thoughts about the midshipmen being undefeated, the Knights being undefeated, and there are a chance of being 2 Army-Navy games this year in case they may both reach a conference championship game?
Well, I think that would be outstanding. Obviously, I root for the midshipmen. Although I was an enlisted guy who swabbed decks and shipped paint, I am a huge supporter of Navy. You know, I actually am a huge basketball fan, and so I'm really excited for the Sixers this year. I'm really hoping that we can remain free of injuries. And I think that we're going to go a long way.
And how is your fantasy football team doing this year?
Well, my fantasy football team right now is, I think we're 2-3. And my fantasy football team, people for whatever reason ask me, you asked me earlier what the name of my fantasy football team is, and it's Any Given Sunday.
And that is a perfect way to sum this conversation up. York County District Attorney Dave Sunday, candidate for Pennsylvania Attorney General on the Republican side. Dave, thank you very much for joining us today.
Thank you for having me. I hope everybody has an awesome day.
Thanks, Dave.
My name is Steve Ulrich for Alex Halper. Thank you for joining us today on the Keystone Candidate Forum. Welcome back to the Keystone Candidate Forum. My name is Steve Ulrich, joined by Alex Halper, the Senior Vice President for Governmental Affairs with the Pennsylvania Chamber of Business and Industry. And Alex, let's just recap what we heard from our 3 Attorney General candidates. From a business standpoint, what did you like what you heard? What perhaps would you wish to have heard more?
Well, first, I think we saw some pretty capable, smart, talented candidates for office. They answered questions pretty thoroughly. I thought with Eugene DePasquale, I mean, he has been in politics for a while. As I mentioned in our conversation with him, we worked with him as a state representative, over 10 years ago. He has been Auditor General. He really seemed to emphasize bipartisanship, and clearly he is trying, after what was a very packed primary, the Democratic primary for Attorney General, clearly trying to appeal to a broader audience here. I noticed that when he talked about previous attorneys general that he admired for one reason or would look to emulate, he mentioned Governor Tom Corbett, a Republican, very, very early on. He also highlighted how, as Auditor General, his audit of Governor Wolf, a Democrat, was something that he was proud of. So, so clearly trying to appeal to a broader audience beyond that base of supporters that he was focused on during that primary.
One of the things that struck me was the discussion about how important it is to have been a prosecutor and have been in the courtroom. Dave Sunday has certainly made that a foundation of his campaign. Eugene DePasquale has basically said, no, it's not. I've run a state agency. Eric Settle from the Forward Party really agreed with DePasquale, saying that he didn't feel that actually being the prosecutor was the most important thing. It was more about whether or not you could lead a big agency like that.
Yeah, obviously there'll be a difference of opinion because we have in the race someone who has been a prosecutor and is currently the district attorney in York County, and someone in Eugene DePasquale who, while he's had an impressive political career, does not have that prosecutor experience. I thought Dave Sunday, he clearly has a good story to tell, I thought, of his experience in York County, both balancing that tough on crime kind of prosecutor approach, but at the same time, he was talking a lot about helping people. And I noted that the PA Chamber had worked with him on criminal justice reform, and again, balancing that tough on crime with the reality that individuals who are coming out of incarceration or have criminal records, we need policies and we need elected officials who will work with that population to make sure that they do get a job, that they can't support their families, or we have this recidivism issue. It was interesting how they both addressed that issue of prosecutor experience, with Sunday clearly emphasizing that's something he brings to the table.
I'm also kind of fascinated to look at the hometowns, the home areas of both candidates. DePasquale, certainly known statewide, very proud of his Pittsburgh roots, as you may have seen. Dave Sunday comes from York County, the 9th largest county among the 67 in the state, but around the Commonwealth as large as, not many people know where York County is. By the same token, when they step into the ballot box in the polling place, will they say, I don't want to vote for someone from Pittsburgh. I want to vote for someone from part of the state where I reside.
Right. Well, and you may recall that DePasquale, as a state representative, was elected from York County. He has this perhaps interesting advantage of having so-called roots in multiple regions of the Commonwealth. Clearly today, now I'm sure he is a passionate, legitimate Pittsburgh Pirates fan, but I can't help but wonder, maybe I'm jaded by politics, if part of the Pirates getup was to appeal to that Western Pennsylvania crowd. Whereas as Dave Sunday, he is, York County is really part of his overall his story and what he's saying to Pennsylvania voters of here's my York County experience. It is interesting, and there are so many high profile races right now. Of course, the top of the ticket with the presidential, but a U.S. Senate race, a number of highly competitive congressional races around Pennsylvania. It is tough, I think, for these so-called row offices of Attorney General, Auditor General, and Treasurer. tough for them to get attention and to try to distinguish themselves from some of these other candidates. And how, if they're successful in doing that, I think will ultimately decide who's the next attorney general.
And that's a great point. The oxygen has been sucked out of the room by the two presidential candidates. But I think what we heard was a lot of similar ideas when it comes to social issues, whether it's social media, whether it's AI, gun control, reproductive rights. There wasn't a great deal that was separating the two candidates. It really came down to the idea of, do you need to be a prosecutor to hold the position?
Yeah, it struck me how both really emphasized artificial intelligence and social media and the role of the attorney general to protect, protect companies. What I saw maybe a slight nuance was the distinction between a candidate who views their role as attorney general as being combative and hostile with the tech sector and with employers, perhaps versus a candidate who views their role as more collaborative. We're all in this together, and we working together we can combat some of these concerning trends.
And that's something that Eric Settle had brought up as well, making the point that he is socially liberal, fiscally conservative, where I think if you asked a lot of people around the state, they'd classify themselves in that role, and saying basically we need to all work together to solve the problems to move the Commonwealth forward.
It's always fascinating. You throw a third-party candidate into the mix, and what difference that makes. And I think that may be more relevant than ever in this political environment. I guess we'll see.
My thanks to Alex Halper, the Senior Vice President for Governmental Affairs with the Pennsylvania Chamber of Business and Industry. My name is Steve Ulrich. Thank you so much for joining us today on the Keystone Candidate Forum.